Hello and welcome to another Improve Your Chess video. This is part 6 in this chess strategy for beginners series. Take a look as I play. This is the 20th game in this series where I play against a good friend of mine, John, who is still learning and improving at chess. So in this game, it looks like John played at an 80% accuracy level, which is not too bad. And I played at 91.8. Now, he had 3 inaccuracies, a mistake, and a blunder. And I had 1 inaccuracy and a missed opportunity. So let's take a look at this game and talk about strategy and just see how you can apply strategy to your own chess games. So, with the computer analysis on, and John begins with the white pieces with e4 here. And as I mentioned in previous chess strategy for beginner videos, centralizing pawns, especially the e and the d pawn. So it's usually a good idea to bring these pawns out to the center. And if you're thinking, well, should I move them 1 square or 2? Usually 2 squares is better because it gives your bishops more room, to develop. Of course, you don't want to go here or a pawn would grab you. So more likely you'd move your bishops along these diagonals. And a strategy is to move the knights out first because that'll give you time. The knights are almost always well placed here and here. But the bishops, you don't know yet where you want to put them along these diagonals until the game develops a little bit more. And then, that gives you time to see where best to place your bishops. All right, moving along. Here, we have 2 different types of strategy to control the center. Now, you can put pawns and pieces in towards the center where you're attacking squares in the center. So this pawn is attacking the d5 square and also this f5 square. But once I put a bishop here on b7, that bishop will aim down through the center and all the way to the king side. So another modern way that you can play is putting the bishops here and having them aim into the center from the sides of the board, as opposed to just putting everything in the middle. Either way, can be all right. This way is a little bit more complicated, putting the bishops off to the side and aiming down through the center. All right, so a good move here by John, knight to f3. But if your opponent is going to let you place both pawns in the center, maybe it would be better to just immediately centralize both of your pawns because then both of your bishops will have room to maneuver behind these pawns. But knight to f3 is still good because, as I've mentioned before, you want to get your king castled to safety quickly. All right. So I continue with my plan, and whatever strategical plan you come up with in chess, it's usually, even if it's not the greatest plan or a bad plan, the saying out there, a bad plan is better than no plan at all, makes sense because you want to come up with some kind of plan or little mini plans that add on to each other. That way, you're focused on trying to achieve something, because if you have no plan, no strategy or strategical plan, then your pieces will kind of just wander around with no purpose. So we develop the bishop, firing down through the center towards the king side. So that could be valuable later in the game. John has developed his knight, getting 1 step closer to castling. All right, so now an inaccuracy here. And we see that knight to c3 would have been a better move because I'm attacking this pawn, so something has to be done about this pawn. And the best thing would have been to develop the knight protecting the pawn. But why is this an inaccuracy? Well, look at this move. Okay, the one good side to this move is now you're ready to castle. But the bishop here is blocked in by its own pawn here. It's stuck protecting a pawn. And it also has blocked the other pawn. And because that pawn is blocked, now the bishop is blocked from being able to develop along this diagonal. So you want to make sure your pieces stay coordinated and they're not in each other's way, blocking each other and congesting your position. So what should have been done here? Knight to c3 should have been played. All right, so now I'm trying to set up the hippo defense where you fianchetto both of your bishops. And this says it's an inaccuracy because the computer likes centralizing moves, and it says e6 would have been a little bit better. But I'm following my strategy of developing both bishops and having them aim down through the center of the board. Now, another strategy that is usually a good idea to remember is not to move pieces twice in the opening unless you have a good reason. Now, maybe John thought this was a good reason to move here, attacking the weak F pawn, which is only protected by the king. So that can be a good strategy, attacking this weak pawn here on F7. But here it's just too slow because it's going to take time. He's thinking, oh, the queen can come down here and pile up on this pawn. But that just takes too long. And you don't want to attack with just two pieces, a queen and a knight. You want to get your whole army off the back row. Get your king castled to safety. Develop the other knight. After you castle, figure out what to do about this bishop that's blocked in. Maybe you can move the c pawn up and back this bishop up, but that takes a lot of time. Anyway, this is a mistake. The computer actually likes c3, moving this pawn up, dropping the bishop back so that the other pawn can move forward, allowing you to get your pieces, to coordinate a little bit better. All right, so it looks like e5 or e6 is the best move in this position because I played e6 and now it's saying that is best. That may allow my other pawn to push forward, helping to attack this pawn. But more importantly, this allows a discovered attack on his knight with my queen. And I guess John overlooks this because he plays a blunder here. He's going for a quick checkmate right here with the knight and the queen piling up on the F pawn. So this would be a good strategy if the tactics of the position weren't overlooked here. Because now, it's easy to stop this. I could, bring a queen here and block. Remember, whenever there's an attack brewing, you have different ways to fight it. You could block the threatening piece. You could try and capture it, but this pawn is in the way, so my bishop can't capture. I could block with the pawn. I could move the knight up to block. But why not eliminate the threat and grab a free knight here? So that is what I do. Now, what should John have played? It looks like instead retreating that knight back would be best. So don't waste time moving pieces twice unless you're absolutely sure the attack will work. And that just comes with experience as you play more. All right, so I just go ahead and snatch a free knight here. So now I'm ahead a piece, and that should be pretty much winning. So what do you do strategy wise when you're ahead in material? Well, even if it's just, you're ahead by one pawn, but more importantly, if you're ahead by a whole piece, if you can't directly go after your opponent's king, well, then you can just start trading off the other pieces. And when I say pieces, I mean knights, bishops, rooks, the queens. Start trading them off and try to make even trades, of course. Don't give up your queen for a bishop or a knight, or a rook. But try and make even trades because, well, why do you want to do that? Because once you trade off the pieces, you'll be left with that extra piece that they don't have. So if I trade off all the pieces evenly, I would have an extra knight. And then I can use that extra knight to pick off my opponent's pawns and help promote my pawns, and get a queen back. So that is a way you can win if you can't directly go after your opponent's king. Now, I do not want to, if I don't have to, trade off pawns. Because if we traded all the pawns and the pieces off the board and I just have an extra knight, you can't win with a king and a knight versus a lone king. All right, moving on. Finally, my opponent castles to safety. As I say, castle early and often is a famous saying, so that's something you should do, and I recommend is get the king castled. Because once it's castled, it can only be attacked from two different angles, straight on or from this direction. Nothing can come off from off the board on the other side over here. Nothing can attack from this direction. But if a king is left in the center, it can be attacked straight on from the left and the right. So this cuts down a third of your opponent's attacking angles by castling. All right, so this is an excellent move, although the computer wanted c3 to untangle the central pawn and bishop here. All right, I just follow through with my plan to fianchetto my other bishop, so it's aiming down here, through the center of the board and lining up on the rook. And, if my opponent would try and fianchetto his bishop, I could possibly pick off his rook here. All right, so finally this c3 move is played, but now, because this pawn is protected, bishop to c4 is recommended as being a little bit better. Which would aim down at my king side over here, because that's most likely where I'm going to castle once I just move this knight. But I could move the other knight and have the option to castle over on the queen side. But let's see what happens. I do develop this knight, and John continues with this move. All right. What does this move do? Well, I guess he didn't want maybe the queen and the bishop lining up, threatening a checkmate in the future. Or maybe he wants to push this h-pawn and chase my queen away. But maybe it would have been better because strategy-wise, you don't want to move too many pawns in front of your king, or it can create weaknesses. Now these light squares are weak around his king, unless he can get his bishop over here to g2 to plug up these light squared weaknesses. All right, so I attack. This is the best move in the position. I'm forking the queen and the bishop here. If I could move here in the future, I could check the king maybe, or try and get some little attack going against the king. But more importantly, I'm trying to start trading pieces. As I mentioned, I'm ahead by a knight, so I need to trade the rest of the bishops, knights, rooks, and queen off the board if I can. And if I can take this bishop, I will get rid of my opponent's bishop pair. Another important strategy. If you can keep both of your bishops, but get rid of one of your enemy's bishops, well then, if I get rid of this light squared bishop, but I keep my light squared bishop, then I'll have this extra bishop to attack all the light squares, and he won't have a bishop to counter that. And especially with these weak light squares. Now, why are they weak? Because this pawn has pushed forward, and that pawn was protecting f3 and h3. So a strategy to watch out for is really think about pushing your pawns before you do it. Think, and ask yourself, will I leave behind weaknesses? Once a pawn moves forward, especially if there aren't any other pawns to cover the weaknesses the pushed pawn creates, then you could have problems. So if we look here, this pawn was pushed forward and it leaves behind a weakness. It was covering here and here when that pawn was on c2. But now this pawn is still covering b3, but there is a weakness here on d3 that can no longer be protected because the pawn that was on e2 can, it's pushed forward, creating weaknesses. So just remember that pieces can move back to where they were if they have to, but pawns can never go backwards. So every time you push a pawn forward, it leaves behind weaknesses, weakened squares that your opponent may be able to take advantage of. All right, so the queen has to move because it was under attack by the knight here. But the computer says this is an excellent move, but it prefers the retreat. So if we go back, a better move would have been to retreat back. So, excuse me, I attack, forking the pieces. I went too far. If this bishop just retreated back instead, well, that gets rid. Actually, hold on a minute. Why would that be best? That would just leave the knight to capture. That doesn't make sense. Hold on here. So the computer is recommending that we let them take our queen. Come on, computer, that doesn't make any sense at all. So in this position, they're recommending bishop to e2. Huh. Well, okay, that's the second best move. Queen to e2 makes more sense. So, but look right here. It's saying bishop to e2 would have been better. I don't know, that seems awful. Queen to e2, I understand, because then they could recapture. Anyway, they move here, and this helps with the objective of trading off material. So now I can just go ahead and trade queens now, which is what I do, and the computer says that's best. So after recapture, now I'm able to pick up a bishop for free here. So, this was a perfect example of that pawn pushing forward and leaving behind a weak square on d3. And once again, tactics. Make sure you look at the tactics and study tactics if you have problems with this. I have problems with tactics myself, especially in quick games when I have to calculate quickly. All right, so trying to keep the bishop on the board, otherwise I could have just captured that, but now I pick off a pawn, and this move is played. Maybe trying to limit where my knight can go, because now if I go here, the rook could capture me, but I still have some other moves to make. So I move here, threatening that bishop again, and the pawn pushes forward. So I guess John is trying to attack, but really he should have maybe retreated his bishop back, and the computer says that that's best, because if the bishop retreated, then the bishop would be covering these diagonals and limiting the scope of my knight. So that's a strategy that you can use when the knight, is eyeing a bunch of squares here. If you drop the bishop back to where it controls those squares that the knight could go to, that bishop does a good job of limiting what the options are for that knight. All right, anyway, I capture and I'm just trading off more material. And now I'm able to pick up another pawn, and I'm forking the rook and the knight. So the knight is protected by the rook, and I just continue trading. But here, the best move would have been to recapture. Instead, John tries to run with a pawn, maybe thinking he can try and get a queen. But my bishop would be doing a good job of stopping this pawn from promoting to a queen. So that's the only thing I can think of, is that he was trying to promote this pawn or create some kind of openings towards my king. But here, it looks like the computer actually likes a pawn capture here. Instead of saving my bishop, because I'm already ahead in material. And that brings me to another good strategy. Once you're ahead in material, you can always give back a little bit of that material to keep your advantage. Let's say your opponent has some little attack going, like he did with this pawn, threatening, trying to promote to a queen. So I take time out, stop that threat, even though I give back a little bit of material, but I'm still ahead. So he's attacking this pawn. It's protected by the king. I just pick off another pawn here. So like I said, a good strategy is to use your extra material to pick off their pawns and then try and promote yours. So now I have these two passed pawns here that will try and move up the board. Now, what are passed pawns for beginners that don't know? A passed pawn is a pawn that has no other pawns that can stop it. So they're free to just move up the board and try to promote. The only thing that can stop them are pieces. Now, this pawn doesn't have a pawn in front of it, but it still has this pawn here that could capture it once it gets to d4. So it's an unopposed pawn, meaning there's no pawn in front of it, but it's not passed yet, because if it tried to go up here to d4, the e pawn could just capture it. So, like this. All right, moving on. The rook retreats back, keeping the rooks connected. So I attack the rook here. So it moves, attacking the unprotected pawn. So I just start moving my passed pawns forward. I move it here where it's protected by the d pawn. And now this will help me push this pawn up where it'll be protected by the c pawn. So I keep a pawn chain where the pawns are protecting each other as they move up the board. So here's another strategy that could help you. You see how he moved his rooks to the dark squares. Now this bishop can't really do much because it's only attacking light squares. So if your opponent has one bishop, like I only have the light squared bishop, you can put all your pieces on the dark squares like he has done. And now my bishop is kind of like a ghost, where it just roams around on the light squares, but it can never touch any of these pieces. So that's a strategy that you can use, especially in end games. All right, moving on. I have to develop the pieces that aren't doing anything yet. So my other rook and knight. And we have a rook to c3 move here. Maybe getting ready to push this pawn and attack my bishop here. So, game continues with knight developing, blocking that pawn, attacking his rook here. So he moves out of the line of fire, attacking my unprotected pawn. But now I can just push that forward, protected by the pawn chain here. And it's one step closer to promotion. All right, the rook moves here, attacking this pawn, but it was protected by the king anyway, and it just jumps forward, and now it's protected by both of these pawns. All right, my opponent, he's kind of limited on what he can do. He pushes forward here, maybe giving his king some extra breathing room. Excuse me. Now, I move my rook up to the 7th rank. Another great strategy when it comes to rooks. The first thing you want to do with rooks is get them on open or half-open files. An open file is the best because now my rook was able to jump up to the 7th rank. And then on the 7th rank, it's restricting the king. It also attacks a pawn. A lot of times there'll be, still a lot of pawns on the 7th rank, and the rook can get up there and start eating up these pawns. So now I want to get my other rook over here if I can, so the rooks can work together in tandem. All right, so an attack on the unprotected pawn, but that pawn just starts moving up the board, which is the best move, getting those pawns closer to promotion. All right, and the knight was protecting that pawn. So John pushes forward here. One thing you may want to think about, why did he take 2 moves when he could have just moved this in one? This pawn went here, and then it went all the way up to here. Maybe he was trying to restrict the movement of my bishop when he had it here on h3. But something to think about. If you're going to move, especially in the center, why move a pawn up 1 square if you can move it up 2 squares to give you more space in the position? All right, so I'm able to capture, and so the final attack begins here. I pick off a pawn, kind of trap his king in. The knight is protecting this rook. The bishop is limiting spaces around the king as well. So, what does John do? He places the rook on an open file, and that's usually a good strategy. But, he's running out of options here because he's behind in material. So I castle, and this is interesting. I tell you to castle early and often, which is a great strategy. I didn't follow it here. It's move 27 before I castled, which is pretty rare in a game. Usually you want to castle within the first 10 moves or less. But there was a lot going on in the game. So that is the exception. If there are tactics and you're able to pick up material, then sometimes you won't need to castle early. But it's usually a good idea to do that. And maybe I should have kept my king in the center, but this was a way to get my rook out quickly as well. So doubling of the rooks on an open file, usually a good idea. And a missed opportunity here. All right. Well, this is the plan that I was using earlier. And, I'm still ahead, so this isn't such a terrible move. B4, attacking and pressing forward with my pawn, getting closer to promotion. The computer actually likes rook to g2, saying there's a mate in 2 here. So we could take a quick look at this mate in 2 with this move here. All right, we have a check. And what can be done here? Well, if the king goes to the corner, then the knight could just jump in there and deliver a checkmate. So most likely the king would go, out of the corner. The best move would be to f1. But now we see that the bishop, the bishop is covering these two squares. The knight is covering these two squares, trapping the king on the back rank. So the rook would be able to move over to h2 and then deliver a back rank mate here because the king is really trapped. But in the game, I overlooked that. I was following up on my earlier plan of pushing these unopposed pawns, trying to promote them. So here, John is, he doesn't have many options because his limited pieces, but this kind of helps me in the strategy of trading off material. So he thinks, maybe he can get an attack on my king, but I'm able to just trade off more material. What would have been better instead of that rook move? It looks like better would be rook to a2. Sorry, wrong one. This rook up here to a2 to get rid of this threatening rook that could possibly checkmate in 2. But in the game, we have this move. I capture, which is best, getting rid of more material pieces, I should say, not material as far as pawns. So now I'm in check. I have to move forward. And John responds with attacking this pawn, but it is protected. Now, I do have a quick mate, and I'm just overlooking this. Once again, rook to g2 is the best move. But I continue with my plan of pressing the pawns. When you're behind in material, you want to trade off as many pawns as you can to get rid of those pawns so your opponent can't promote them with his extra pieces. All right, so we have a check, or excuse me, I centralize my rook, and the rook moves up here, which is best to prevent a back rank attack on the king. Something like this, and then maybe over here. So maybe I saw that checkmate possibility, but I missed the other one with rook to g2. Going here, and then here and here for a back rank mate. So, yeah, when you're factoring in all your strategies, stop, take a minute, what you think is a good move, because there might be a better one there, especially when tactics are involved. All right, I block, trading off more material. This is a good move, but once again, the rook to g2 and back rank mate would have been better. So here, he could have captured, but he's just running for it now. So pawn capture, but now we have the mate finally. I know that took a long time and I overlooked some earlier mate possibilities. But, that's what you can do if you pick off material. So that's a good strategy. Try and attack, go ahead and material if you can. Use your extra material to pick off their pawns and push your pawns to promotion. But if there are tactics that override your strategy, like this mate here, then it is a lot better to do that, of course. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the 6-part chess strategy for beginner series and this 20 video Improve Your Chess series where I played 20 games against my good friend John. So that will be the end of these games for a while, unless we play more games in the future. So feel free to leave any comments. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for those that haven't already to support the channel. So thank you for watching and have a super chess day.